Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry I cannot be there in person, but I'm very happy that we can make it work here virtually. So yes, thank you for putting up the slides there. Planning for an uncertain future. I know the title and the agenda is different, but the content will be the same. So Constantine, if you can click through to the next slide. I want to talk a little bit about the translation technology landscape report that Taos has published last year. A picture of the future for our industry and what it means for enterprises, language service providers, and governments, the dilemmas and strategies that we're facing. And happy to take some questions at the end. So yes, please click through. The Translation Technology Landscape Report, I just wanted to mention at this point, this is available for those of you who don't know it yet. You can download it from our website. It's a 70-page report, which gives a nice overview of the landscape, all the different type of translation technology tools that are out there with the descriptions. And it also has a nice picture of the evolution of our industry, which I will talk about a little bit now, the trends we're seeing and the opportunities and challenges. So if you can click through, please. Yeah, and again, there's some animation in these slides. Let's have the full picture if you can click one more time. And one more time, and I think we have everything done. Yeah, if you can click one more time, Constantine. Yeah, then that makes it easier to talk through. So for simplicity reasons, we've broken it down in 5 episodes, if you like, phases for the industry, starting from the 80s and then every decade nicely at the full number there, 1980 we start. As an industry, of course, the translation profession is much older than that, but we started organizing ourselves to help immigrants migrating to the new world with their diplomas, translating them into English most of the time, and reverse translating many of the booklets that came with transistor radios and refrigerators and so on. So it was a very simple kind of industry, no tools. If we did a good job, then we would keep a glossary on the side of our work, handwritten, to make sure that we would translate the terminology consistently. In the 90s, we started putting another label on our sector called the localization industry, and things became digital. And we started to use some real software, translation memory software, which helped to increase the productivity of the individual translator. Around the year 2000, you see new titles popping up to give our industry or our services a bit more standing. We called it globalization. And at this stage, you see the emergence of workflow tools, connecting all those translation memory tools together in the single process, and moving the benefits from the desktop, from the translator to the client, to the buyer of translation, by pushing or pulling the translation onto a central server. Most of the companies are now in this, what we call the integration phase. We have the translation process more or less connected and automated, but how do we now plug it into all these other functions in the enterprise, in the content management systems, in the customer relationship management systems, in the search environment, social media. This integration is what's on people's mind most of the time. The content keeps growing, and also you see a change in the language directions. Has it been mostly from English into export languages, a typical export mentality? We now realize that the world is connected in many different ways, and we need to crisscross the globe, and also translate from target into English quite often, or into other languages. And from a technology point of view, you now for the first time see the need of real-time translation, kind of competing with the innovators like Google, who make translation instantly available on through the search engines. And the thing here, and that's sort of what we're highlighting when we talk about translation becoming a utility, or when I say planning for an uncertain future, is that we see this convergence era coming. It's already here. It's around us. When you see, for instance, the entity Docomo translation glass, we've given them an excellence award at our Taos Tokyo event just last month. Because they're building translation into smart eyewear, and so is Google, of course. And so we will see translation embedded in everything we do. In every on every screen, in every app, in every device, and scary maybe, but also tremendous opportunities. We see that our target audience is suddenly increasing from a couple of 10,000 buyers of translation to potentially 6 billion citizens in the world who need somehow some kind of translation. So in this new age, translation will become real time, and machine translation will be ubiquitous. It will be everywhere. And that's what we need to prepare for. And we will not translate into just 10, 20, or 50 or 60 languages, but in many, many more. So that's a kind of a snapshot of where we come from and where we're going. If you can click through, Constantine. The world around us, yes, please. Repeating what I perhaps said to some extent, we live in a time of hyper-globalization. This is taken from the Peterson Institute for International Economics report that came out last July or August, I think. So some time ago already, but it highlights what we already know because we read it in the newspaper every day. Tremendous growth in the global trade. In the last 2 decades, we see that 75 of the developing countries are catching up with the economic frontier, which is still the United States. Although, we saw that China may already be taken over this year instead of in 2 or 3 years from now. So world trade is growing, and what is interesting also is we're going from stuff to fluff. What that means is that more and more content is driven by products or services that you simply send over the internet. Even very physical goods like agricultural machinery, a tractor, has a lot of software in it and gets updated over the internet while it's running over the prairie somewhere in Siberia. So this is good for our industry. More and more goods are information carriers, if you like, and require translation. More and more openness that's widely embraced in the world, and is crisscrossing the globe. So multiple language directions is driven by this overall hyper-globalization. The downside, that was, sorry, I had just one more thing to say about this inequality in nations. It's just a side note. That's the only, I would say, negative side of this hyper-globalization report, that we see within the nations more inequality, so an uneven spread of the wealth, which is, by the way, flagged as by the last economic forum in Davos as a major threat to the global economy. On top of this, before I say please click through, just last month, McKinsey came out with a report that shows that this hyperglobalization seems to accelerate even in the next 2 decades, where they say the global flow will double or triple in the next decade. So it just keeps going. Yes, please. So this growth comes from the next billion user, and some of the biggest internet companies like Facebook and Google, of course, and Microsoft, they're totally aware of this. And this is coming from the internet.org setup that Facebook started together with some of the largest telecom operators. Their worry primarily is access to data. So making internet cheaper and more accessible in developing parts of the world. But they do have, this is taken from the internet.org website, they do also, they are also aware of the language barrier. So content isn't not available in the local language is another barrier. So, you know, we do need more technology to help us take down that barrier. Yes, please. Linguistic diversity is the new reality. Of course, there are people who say, well, don't worry, English will eventually be spoken by every citizen in the world. And Lane Green, who will be speaking at our Industry Leaders Forum in 2 weeks in Dublin, economist, editor, and also the writer of this book, You Are What You Speak, thinks that language tuition will become technologically ever more easy and efficient, so everyone will start learning English. Nicholas Ostler, though, author of the book The Last Lingua Franca, referring to English, of course, as the last lingua franca, is convinced that linguistic diversity is the new reality, and English will gradually lose its dominant role in the world, and machine translation technology will take its place. So there will not be a new natural language as a lingua franca. We're all too diverse and too connected over the internet to see another dominant language popping up, but the technology will take its place. So that will be, both of them will be debating at our Industry Leaders Forum in 2 weeks. It will be interesting to see who wins, so to say. It's hard to say. We're at Taos, we're tending a little bit more to Nicholas Ostler's view of the future, actually. Yes, please. So what does this mean for the translation industry? Let's have a look at each of the major stakeholders' perspectives, if you can click through. Yeah, we're referring back to an article that we published back in 2010, where we talk about translation becoming utility. If you like to just dig up some of the articles from the TAS website, it's just a link here, if you can click through. Translation goes mobile, that's obvious. I don't need to say that. We see it just on our own website, which is hopefully old-fashioned because people can't read or see all our content very well on mobiles and tablets, and yet we see that already more than 30% of the visitors of our site come from a mobile or tablet. So very soon, fortunately, in July or August, we'll have a whole new website where everything seems to be working on every screen. But this is the future, clearly. Yes, please. Translation becomes datafied, and we're not just talking about data as the raw material for, or the training material for machine translation, but also, and we've seen that in a presentation by Oracle at last year's Taos Industry Leaders Forum, how they use data to also take all of the decisions about which content to be translated at which quality level. It's becoming a very nuanced world because, you know, eventually people are facing oceans of content and hundreds of languages to choose from, and you will not be able to translate every chunk of information with the same level of quality, and maybe you're certainly not able to translate everything. So to take these decisions, to provide the intelligence to take these decisions, more and more companies are starting to use data coming from the translation process to take these decisions. Yes, please. So I mentioned already the convergence, translation becoming utility, and so it becomes wearable and it becomes implantable. Babelfish is coming. I'm sure that we'll see that even within many of our lifetimes happening. Also, the integration the convergence happening with other technologies. So with speech technology, of course, we're going to see spoken translation more than written translations. After all, people prefer to listen and speak over reading and writing. And so also the style of translation becomes more informal, where we see a difference in needs from more informal translation, more conversational translation. Yes, please. Could you check through? Yeah, translation shifts gears. I alluded to that already a little while ago, that we see these worlds kind of overlapping. This 21st century's convergence, which becomes mobile, datafied, where translation is embedded in everything we do, thousands of languages, new payment models, where people want translation real time and are happy with good enough translation. That's the new world of translation that has been created already by the innovators, invaders, as we'd like to call them. And we see that happening every day with new internet companies that carry translation suddenly as a sexy or compelling offering. And that world is kind of taken over our publisher-driven translation industry. So this 21st century convergence is driven by the users, by the millions and millions of people that click on the free translate button, for instance, now already every day, or the people who will be wearing those intelligent glasses or other bodywear that provides access to information in many languages. So those two are starting to impact each other. More impact from the big red balloon over our small blue balloon, where we service the relatively small number of customers who can afford the luxury service of translation. So if you click through that, then okay, I thought there was some animation there, but you know, we're this is sort of the picture we use to illustrate what Taus's role is in the industry since 2005, kind of addressing an overall sort of mindset that exists in the translation sector of companies who say we know better, and our approach is together we know more. We think it's really time for the players in the sector to work together, to share resources, to agree on best practices, to establish more standards, share metrics, and so on. Yes, please. So the convergence, coming back on that title, is happening on the various levels. On a pure functional level, so from a business perspective, and also on a technology level, where we see, for instance, the convergence of speech technology and machine translation technology. Yeah, if you can click through. This refers to another set of publications on the Taos website coming from 2011 and onwards, where we start talking about the many things to change in the translation process from an enterprise, from a client perspective, and where we ask ourselves the question, and it's also highlighted in the translation technology landscape report, whether the future is open or closed. And it has a lot to do with the access to data, to the translation memory data, where, of course, you see a strong pursuit of owning the data by large IT companies, and where we're sort of defending the case for an open sharing platform of translation memory data to support this this future of helping the world communicate better and positioning or delivering translation as a utility. If you can click through, please. Yeah, so this is open or closed question. Yes, please. I forgot what kind of animation is there. This is also taken from the Translation Technology Landscape report, where we're highlighting the drivers and inhibitors on this journey into the future. And again, you see the open or closed data question there. Open being a driver, closed being an inhibitor. Another one that I'd like to highlight just quickly here is the skills, talents that are available in the sector. Of course, since the translation sector will be more and more technology driven and data driven, we do need a new type of skill, and they're hard to find. They're not coming in enough supply from the universities in the world, so this is a concern, inhibitor for the pickup of this innovation, the growth of our sector. Yeah. So what does this all mean for the enterprises? Couple of slides to take a look at the future from the buyer's perspective. This is a SWOT picture: strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, resulting from sessions that we had with a good number of large global companies, like the ones like Siemens, Philips, General Electric, and Canon, and John Deere, and what have you. Had them together in roundtable meetings, the few occasions back in 2000, 2011. And we asked them, what do you see from your perspective as your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? And as we did these kind of sessions a couple of times, we were so surprised that the picture didn't change. It was very consistent. So what it is that most of them are very happy with the leverage they're getting from translation memory, the old last century technology, so to say. And they are very happy with a well-established process and management in their translation, localization, or globalization department, whatever you call it. However, on the flip side, they felt very often insecure about quality. Sometimes local flavor is missing and they can't get their finger behind it. What is causing this problem? How can we resolve it? And also lack of flexibility in the landscape. They feel that they're often just reacting to problems. They're not in a position to be creative or proactive. And the quality review is slow. It's a bottleneck for a lot of the buyers. On the opportunity side, they're excited because they see the opportunities as much as we do. With the hyper-globalization opening up so many new markets, that machine translation could possibly help them there, how they can engage closer with users and communities. Also the technology of video, speech multimedia, converging that into their text-based translation processes, optimizing search as a new service for the localization department to other enterprise functions, etc. The use of mobile. But on the flip side of that, they feel like they are not so agile. They're not so flexible in picking up on those opportunities because they're locked into a vendor base. They're not scalable. They're not able to ensure quality, etc. So that's the consistent picture from the buy side. Yes, please. And that is happening in what we call a cascaded supply chain, where there's a lot of replication in functions in terms of vendor management, project management, quality assurance. Every level is in the supply chain: client, the multi-language vendor, which is a bit of an outdated acronym, of course, who is not a multi-language vendor these days. Let's say the international company and the in-country translation agency. They seem to have very overlapping roles and functions, and it's not clearly defined who's doing what. Yes, please. So then we took a look at the content that the enterprises are dealing with, and there's the top of the pyramid where it's kind of the more or less static content, traditional user manuals, the website, home pages at least, and at the bottom is this ever expanding content explosion content revolution with social media content, support websites where communities get involved, etc. Yes, please. And then if you can click again, I think we see those two overlap. That was our sort of aha erlebnis, if you like. We said, okay, this SWOT analysis has a peculiar overlap with the content disruption, the content pyramid, which poses us for an innovation dilemma. Shall we just innovate our process for the bottom of the pyramid and leave the top sort of untouched? That was just for argument's sake. But if you click through, we get to those 8 things to change, which is kind of the recipe for the enterprise, for the big enterprises. They're living in the last century still with their translation operations, delivering one translation quality, thinking that that will fit all the needs and all the languages and all the audiences and all the content. They select a locale for a limited number of languages. They count the words. They own that content. They find a translation memory, assign it to the job, to the project. They find a project, scope it out, and send it down the cascaded supply chain. It's all driven by them. They're in control. They're king, and it's one directional from mostly from English into the export languages of the world. Well, that is, as they say, so last century. But if you click through and we see what the 21st century is bringing, it's not just this top-down globalization, but also bottom-up. Information is everywhere and people are connecting, and we need a differentiated quality. We need dynamic quality for different types of content, different types of audiences. We deal with a long tail of languages. In fact, it's sometimes unpredictable which languages are needed. And there are zettabytes of content now, and it's not just the content the enterprise owns, but it's also the content that they share, that is being shared with them, and that they, in a way, earn. Data is now core instead of translation memories. We need a continuous translation process. It's collaborative quite often, and it's driven by users, and it's multi-directional. And what is more, if you just click a few times, then you see these customer groups popping up in the middle of the customer experience cycle, if you like. It's a little bit taken from McKinsey here. But what it wants to illustrate is that we often need to step up from just translating for a locale, for a language, to adapting products to particular customer niches, so personalization, which illustrates how we move up and down with quality. Sometimes just providing adjusting quality, and sometimes creating trans creation of hyper localization, personalized content. Yes, please. We got out of the slide deck now. Okay, yeah, thank you. So click this through because this is just a summary of the previous 2 slides. And let's look at what I think most people in the room are the language service providers, if you click through to that. The power in our industry is still on the buy side. It's not always the case in other professional service industries. If you look at the legal or accountancy industries, you see that the supply side often has more power than buyers of the services. So for us on the supply side, it's how do you minimize your risks, and how do you optimize the opportunities here? So we asked these questions in some other kind of brainstorming sessions. Will machine translation take a big role in the translation industry or not? If you click through, constantly you say yes. The answer was definitely yes. There's no question about this anymore. If you click again, do we have to fear that translation will become a free-for-all service? No. I mean, it's there. There is a free service, but it won't take over. And the third question, will the closed or the open business model prevail? That we didn't know, and we still don't know. It's to a large extent in our own hands, whether we push collaboration and sharing in order to maximize our opportunities in this uncertain future. If you can click through again. then it's just stuff that I'd like to refer you to, articles on our website, if you can click through again. Then we talk a little bit about the government perspective, because we think governments can help, although we're not too optimistic that something grand will happen. But if you click through, I just wanted to highlight our pet project, our visionary project, which is the Human Language Project. If you click again, you see that we're using the Human Genome Project as our sort of example, as a reference here, where I guess you're all familiar with this project, how we uncovered the secrets of the human body, of the biology of the human body, how it works, how we unraveled the secrets of the human DNA. Which really spurred growth in the medical sector, in the emergence of the life sciences sector. And see, in terms of, if you just take a money like a few of this, then you see that a relative small investment of 3.8 billion created a huge industry, and also gave human race kind of a whole different future. So can we do the same for language? If you click through, if we collect all of the human language data, we could perhaps unravel the secrets of human language and translate all of our content in all of the languages spoken on the globe. That's the ultimate sort of translation, is becoming a utility. Please click, and creating a future for automatic translation as the new lingua franca. If you can click through again. So that's sort of the full, an article on our website about the Human Language Project. Yes, please. And that's, we can skip that for the sake of time. And that brings us to the end. And I just wanted to say here at the end that you shouldn't see this MT as the new lingua franca and this language translation as a utility, as a threat, because it will come along with a tremendous growth, in our perspective at least, tremendous growth for this transcreation, hyper localization, and in other words, the skills of the humans remain absolutely vital. It will be different, but we also see a growth in human translation, so to say. So thank you.
Thank you. Jaap, thank you for the presentation, and I'd like to start with a question of mine. Here in Ukraine, a translator gets paid 1 cent per word, and an agency, a local agency, gets paid 2 cents per word, which is, I think, vastly different from the Western world. Yeah. Also, we see a rise in technology, MT, translation memory, but that's not inclusive. All those people working here, the language professionals, they're not part of it. So what should a local language professional do to be included in the future? Yeah. Is there a recipe that you can suggest?
Yeah, well, I think it's of course the numbers are even different. It's just a conversion, I guess. 1 cent, 2 cents. It's the same distribution as we see in other countries, where the translator gets half of what the agency gets. But this is very, very low, of course, compared to the rates being paid in other parts of the world. The picture, though, is not very different. I think we cannot escape from the trends that are clearly sort of technology focused and data focused. We need to use the technology as much as we can where it makes sense, and then differentiate our services. So the dynamic approach to content, to audiences, to the translation process. Sometimes out of the box translation may be good enough, so the machine translation may be good enough for certain content. Sometimes it's definitely not good enough, and we need to even step up. And if we can establish sort of a clear understanding, if we work together to push this dynamic approach to content to audiences, we will ultimately also be able to convince the buyers that price differentiation is needed. So maybe this is a good way out. So this is what we're trying to we're working very hard on, for instance, at Taos with the dynamic quality framework, to do content profiling and to say this is content that may require so much more attention and care that the price for translation is 4 times higher than your average rate that you're paying today. Whereas this other content may just come out of a automated process and will be part of a software as a service pricing, just a monthly subscription, no human touch, but we set up the technology, we customize the engine, and that's our investment in an infrastructure, in a software platform. So that's, I think, the future for all the suppliers in the sector, to drive that differentiation.
So differentiate by the content, but it's not easy to customize a machine translation engine for Slavic languages such as Russian and Ukrainian. At the same time, translation is so cheap here that financially it doesn't often make sense. Maybe time-wise, speed-wise it does, but not financially. So why would the client in this part of the world differentiate if he can have all of the content translated by the traditional TEP process? So coming back to my previous questions, if that doesn't work, what else can an LSP, can a language professional do here?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know either. It's a very tough challenge. I mean, let's be very honest. This is a disruptive period. This is a disruptive period in the evolution of our industry, and there will be victims. I'm just talking, of course, on a very general level that this disruption also creates opportunities, but these opportunities will not be equally distributed among all the current players. You'll see innovators coming into our sector who just create a whole new landscape. And we have to be wary for that, concerned about that too. I mean, Google started that as the biggest disruptive innovator, but many others are following that. So yeah, I'm with you.
There is no easy solution, and there'll be victims. There'll be blood.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there is no easy solution. No. We just need to be aware of the big changes, and each in our own particular niche with our own customers. Also, I said it at the ILIA conference in Riga a month ago or so. Similar audience maybe. So you have to also be aware that you may be working with customers who are not affected by these big technology changes already. So you may just survive with the business model that you have at the moment. But there are other situations where you have to be very aware that this change is coming more rapidly than you'd hope for.
Do something else instead.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much for your time and for your presentation. We've run deep into our break here, so we'll have to stop at the point. I wish you luck and safe travels to Moscow next week. Yeah, that's the one thing I wanted to say. If any one of you is from Moscow, please join us coming Thursday at the Taos Roundtable at the Sheraton Palace Hotel. Thank you. Bye-bye. Goodbye.